Hello, everyone. We are now going to briefly look at slot 1 of CAT 2023. And most of you might have already taken the slot and you might be having your own emotions that you're going through right now. But do remember one thing, that whatever you might have experienced, a surprise or an unexpected performance, you should remember that everybody who has written the first slot is actually in the same boat. So without much ado, let's get into the details of the slot. So we have the overview, the pattern of the paper that happened. The slot 1, the section patterns were the same as last 2 years. There was no major surprise in terms of pattern, at least. And what happened in RC, we have 16 questions, and in VA, we had 8 questions in the VARC section. This is the same as in the last couple of years, total 24 questions. And the DILR section had 20 questions, and the QA section had 22. And the number of non-MCQs in VARC, we see that there were only 4. In DILR, there were 6 questions and about 7 in quant. So with that overview of the pattern, which, as I mentioned, is not any surprise, let us move into the details of what happened in the paper. We can see that as per our student reports, there have been much less incidents of any issues with infrastructure or system failure that happened. There were very few, and even of whatever we heard that the issues were resolved without any problems to the student, and there was a smooth experience overall. And as we already said, there was no surprise element in the pattern as such. The timing was known already, and as expected, the pattern was same as last year. Now, looking into the VARC section in a little more detail, what we see is that the passages that we had, the number of passages in RC was 4, again, same as last year. And each passage had 4 questions, that is 16 questions in all, and there were no non-MCQ questions. Again, as is usual, the RCs barely have any non-MCQ questions. But VA this time had a slight change in terms of the distribution of questions in question types. So that is, there were 4 different question types which comprise those 8 questions of PA. Normally, we have been seeing only 3 different question types that come in a split up of 3, 3, 2, or something like that. But this time we had 4 question types appearing distinctly, and each question type had 2. Like we had paraforming questions, 2 of them, and we had sentence placement questions, 2, and 2 para summary questions, and 2 odd one out questions also. And the paraformation questions and the odd one out questions were both non-MCQ type. So that comprised the 4 non-MCQ questions in this section. And coming to the reading comprehension part of the VARC section, this time around, it was slightly on the tougher side. And if you look at each set in a little more detail, there was one set on post-colonialism and the novels and the author's approach, and Indian Ocean-centric approach that has been taken in some literature. And this passage was sort of difficult to read, but along with the difficulty in reading, the questions also had strongly inference-based and strength and weaken kind of arguments. In fact, there was one particular question in which pairs of words were given, associated words, and you had to identify the odd pair. And this passage was overall difficult to answer. Then there was another passage on the return of wolves in France, in rural France especially, and how the farmers and the cattle rearers were suffering because of the return of wolves. It was easy read, almost narrative in nature. And the questions, however, were a surprise, because the CAT examiner made it a point to delve into the author's mind and into arguments. And there were a lot of inference-based questions in this passage, no direct questions, more or less. And the question choices were also very close. So that was also a difficult passage in terms of the questions, but it was easy to read. This would probably have been a good passage to definitely go ahead and attempt. And there was one more passage which was moderately easy to read, that was on the geographical and cultural aspects of societies and civilizations. It also had tough questions, but it was not as tough to read. And then we had the fourth passage on affluent society and an anthropological approach to that. And in this passage, we had a very tough time. Students would have had a tough time to read it because it was a very dense passage with a lot of involved things to follow. And then the questions, interestingly here, were not as difficult as in the other three passages. At least a couple of questions here were based on sort of a direct observation, or you could capture the answer right from looking at the passage. And two questions were a little more challenging and inference based. So that is about the RC passages. The VA part, as mentioned earlier, was not as tough as the RC, and relative to last year's also was on the moderate side. The paraformation questions had a little tricky nature to them because usually the starting of the paraformation would be easy to pick, but here the starting sentence was a little difficult to find. There were two possible candidates that could have started the paragraph, and that would have sent the students into a sort of a tizzy of contemplation, where they would have just wasted their time. So that is something which a student shouldn't have done. So those two statements which could have possibly started, you should have looked at and made a quick call on them. Otherwise, wasting time would have been a big loss to many students. The sentence placement questions that were introduced last year, they also appeared, and there were two of them, and each of them was actually pretty straightforward, maybe moderate in difficulty level, but not easy, of course. Then there were the para summary questions, which also were straightforward, and we could call them as moderate, definitely worth doing. The odd one out questions, again, these were 5 statements in these questions. You have to identify the odd statement. Students should have been very careful while attempting them, because if you did not read the directions properly, there is a very good chance that you would have thought these are paraformation questions. One student comes out of the exam hall and he shares with us that there was one paraformation question with 5 statements and 2 paraformation questions with 4 statements. But the thing is, the student made a mistake in reading the directions. The 2 of the questions were clearly odd man out. Even both of them had 5 statements in them. So here the identification of the odd statement was not very challenging. While if you had to sequence them, it would have, you would have spent some time, it would have taken you more time. But if you understood the theme of the discussion in those statements, one statement would have easily stood out. If not easily, you would have found it out after a little bit of running through the sentences without actually having to put them in a correct order. So the odd statement was definitely easy to spot. So they were also moderate. So overall, the VS section, we could rate it as moderate to difficult. And attempting 3 passages and 6 to 8 VA questions, maybe at least 6. If you had a good strategy, 8 VA questions, this would have been a very good, decent attempt in this section. Of course, if you're very good in VARC and your reading speed and comprehension are strong with good practice, attempting all the questions also would have been amazing, and it is possible. But the accuracy would have definitely been a big question mark, because many students, even after they come out of the hall, they are not very sure of their accuracy. And we'll have to wait for the CAT examiner to publish the key, and only then can we tell. But as we discussed, there were definitely heavily inference and argument-based questions, and the accuracy is not likely to be too high, except for the toppers. And one key to the entire successfully navigating this section would have been not to waste your time, not to lose any time on questions where the choices were close. And that includes both BA questions and also RC questions. Here, we would have to clearly be disciplined, because the time versus the questions and the nature of questions is, the equation is very, very difficult and very, very strict in terms of the time per question that a student can spare. So this would have been a very key factor in determining what makes the difference between topping and acing the section and just barely crossing the cutoff or getting a good percentile. So this is something which students need to always keep in mind. And as mentioned, of course, this was a notch tougher than last year's VRC section. So this is, as far as slot 1 is concerned, we have to wait and see what will happen in the next 2 slots. Let's just have a brief understanding of what could be the percentiles, marks relationship here. And this is the first cut analysis by our experts here at Time. We believe the 85 percentile here is a notch tougher than last year. I mean, last year there was one very easy slot and 2 moderate to tough slots. This time, this is among the tougher slots of last year. This is comparable to that. And the 85 percentile, we expect to be around 16 marks. So a range of 15 to 17 marks should fetch you about 85 percentile. And that's about 7 to 8 attempts with decent accuracy. You would probably be there. But 85 percentile is not going to get you far if you're looking at the IIMs. And a 95 percentile surely is a range you should be looking at. And that would have been around 10 attempts, fetching you around 24 to 26 marks. And to be really in the top, to really secure those IIM calls and ensure, you would have to be looking at a 99 percentile. And that would have been about 15 attempts or more with very good accuracy. That would have fetched you somewhere around 34 to 36 marks or even more. And that is when you can say that you have aced this section. So that's it, friends, about the VA. So let's move on to the DILR section, which we don't need to speak anything new about the section. For years, many years now, it has become really like a section that sort of terrorizes the CAT aspirants. It has taken over the place of quant in one way, DILR, over the many years. Quant used to be the bugbear of most students, except maybe engineers. So same story this year. The DILR section was no different. There were 4 sets, each of 5 questions, and they were all of them a challenge to look at. But yeah, some were tougher, some were easier. So let's look at them. There was one set, first set on houses for sale, and this was very new and novel in terms of the context. The context was a diagram was given for the way houses were arranged into blocks. And there was a road, and then there are occupied houses, and there are unoccupied vacant houses for sale. And the sale price, interestingly, was a formula based on the number of neighbors which are occupied and number of roads which are adjacent to the house. So it looked very elaborate. There was a lot of information, definitions given, some road index and neighbor index, and then there is a possibility of parking space available, no parking space available. So all this added together was the price of each of those houses in that arrangement. And there was some information given about how much was the sale price of the minimum in one block and the maximum in another block, some unoccupied houses. So you are supposed to figure out all the sale prices of all the houses, the occupied vacant status of all the houses, whether the parking is available or not. So that was actually novel in terms of the context. It had a lot of special equations as a major element in trying to crack this case. And it would have been a tough set, which probably was a time sink, or you would have said it would have drawn away all your time if you had gotten into it in a serious manner. It would probably, this was a set best left for the last if you had times to spare. There were other sets which were much more doable. There was one set on professors voting for a dean in their college across 4 departments. And this was again a LR-based distribution kind of set. It had very little quant in it. It was more or less simple distribution with a lot of conditions given, but it was intricate and to understand how to put down your data and how to interpret the lot of information that was also given. A lot of textual information was given here, no table. It would overall also rate as a difficult set. This would also not be the first question what one should go to, but it was probably one of the 2 sets in this section that could have been cracked. There's another set which was probably the easier one, and this was on, this could be classified as a DI sort of a set, which was based on 5 restaurants rating 5 artists who perform in their restaurants likely, and on a rating of 1 to 5. And what were the ratings that were given to each artist by each restaurant? This is what had to be figured out. And interestingly, it was not that every restaurant gave a distinct rating. So in that sense, it's a little more complicated. And a lot of data was given here, and a small table was given about the average ratings received by each of the artists. And the crux here, or the twist here, interestingly, to this set, which would otherwise have been a really doable set, but it fell short, or it is not really as doable, friends, because the data involved statistics terminologies. And the terminologies were a median of the ratings received by each artist. Then there was the modal value of the ratings received, and how many of the normal average student would know these statistical terms. Median perhaps, but would you even know the exact meaning of median? And that when there are multiple repeated values, what happens to the median? So many students would have been very uncomfortable with this set. While it was actually there for the taking, the statistics sort of put a bar or a hurdle to students, to many students. And the modal value, and there was also a variable called range of ratings, but that was defined, at least that was defined as the highest rating minus the lowest rating received by any artist. But the modal and the median and the mean, these are not defined. At least the modal would have put off many students wondering what that would mean. And there were artists who had multiple modes, as in the most frequent value of rating that was assigned to them. When there are two modes, it means at least twice they would have appeared. If the modal value for, let's say, artist U is 1 and 5, it would have meant there are two ones and there are two fives. Now that conclusion comes when you are comfortable with the interpretation of the word modal value. So the most accessible set to anybody in this section also fell short because of these terminology there. So we have to wait and see. This is most likely a moderate set has turned into a moderate to difficult set because of these terminologies that were used, the statistical terms. So there we have even the moderate set going out of reach of some. And there was one more set on scheduling kind of a concept about a consulate where visas are processed in multiple counters, and there is certain time duration in a day for which people can come in. And they have to process their visas for different countries, US, UK, Schengen visa, and other countries. So each takes certain amount of time. And that complicates the amount of data and the kind of nature of the question. And information given on the left side was very lengthy, and it would have put off many students, and fairly so. This set can easily be classified as very difficult. Should have probably been the last set that anyone should have come to. This set and the houses for sale set, the first that we discussed about, would have been best left for last. And the restaurant and artists, if you were comfortable with statistical terminology, it was there for your taking. It was not straightforward, but it was at least doable. And it was probably just easier than the professor's set, which was also the next set which someone should have looked at. So two sets worth doing, moderate to difficult set and a difficult set. But the other two sets were quite out of reach. Unless someone is very smart, very few people would be looking at attempting 3 successful sets in this section. And accordingly, so you would have very, very low cutoffs. So overall, this is difficult to very difficult section, probably even tougher than last year's CAT, but this is for the slot 1 alone that I'm talking about. Then, as mentioned earlier, that one set which was within reach also had a hurdle of statistical terms in it. And you could say that at least a couple of sets had quant concepts, or that LR, it was not purely LR, but it was quant-based LR that was involved here. And it was tough notcher than last year's DILR. So also, so just as VARC, so we see another section which was tougher. So for the cutoffs, we can look at 9 to 11 for 85 percentile. Very few attempts here. It is surprisingly low, but let's wait and watch. This is just our first cut analysis. 95 percentile, a decent performance would have been 14 to 16 marks, around 7-8 attempts with good accuracy, and really acing the section. Anybody with 2 sets attempted very decently or fully cracked 2 sets, trust me, you have aced it. You have cracked that section. You are around the 99 plus percentile with even a decent accuracy. So 3 sets here would probably put you in the league of 100 percentile or 99.9. So let's move on to the third section here, the quant. And as usual, it was 22 questions, and there were 7 non-MCQ questions here. And quant, friends, was a surprise this time around in terms of difficulty level. There's a quick rundown in the presentation you can see of the topics. broadly, you can see that there was an even distribution of arithmetic and algebra, but the algebra questions and the algebra concepts, you could say, stole the show. They literally made even engineers cry. Every person who was confident about their quant performance, they were in for a shock because this time the quant section had very tough algebra-based questions, and even arithmetic questions had some sort of algebra built into them. And that is what was a surprise this time. If there was no other surprise at all in terms of pattern, or let's say VA, DI sections being what they always are, quant section definitely upset the expectations of many students. And here we can see the distribution topic wise, and I'll not go into that in that detail, but the comments, the observations that we can say, as I said, are that algebra, the nature of algebra questions, the level of difficulty of those, even good students, even an IIT student with the limited time would have panicked, literally panicked, to wonder why he's not able to crack questions which are so straightforward to look at, but are not that easy to solve. Questions which normally had only X variable now had X and Y to appear in them. Logarithm questions. There was a question which had harmonic progression that was mentioned. So it was definitely a little upsetting experience for many students, especially those who were comfortable in quant, and those who thought they could coast by or make it through with a 5 or 6 attempts. Trust me, friends, even 5-6 attempts in this section would have been very, very challenging. Last year, you could say that there were at least 3-4 questions, 5 questions that one could have picked if they skimmed through the section. But this time, that number was very, very low. And even the questions which were moderate had some twist to them. But there were some topics that did not make any appearance at all, like trigonometry or maxima minima kind of questions, sets and graphs, Venn diagrams, number systems. There were no questions on these topics, but there were some interesting concepts that came up, like harmonic progression was mentioned in a time and work question. And now how strange is that? Capacities of 3 people are in harmonic progression. And only some people who are good in the quant concepts would have understood that that means the working days of these 3 persons would be in arithmetic progression. Now, well, that apart, there was an interesting question which looked like a time and distance question, and it actually had the time and distance concept, but was more close to numbers to crack it. The concept required was numbers, and the palindrome concept was used in that. So overall, that section was significantly higher in difficulty, tougher, friends, than expected. Because even last year, we felt quant was tougher than the years before that. But this year, it went significantly, a couple of notches higher in difficulty, and it would have upset many people's expectations. It would have made the scoreability of the entire paper low, because in quant, at least the engineers, they get a fair advantage and they do score. But the engineers also this time would have had very, very limited attempts in this section. So the cutoffs here are again on the lower side, probably even lower than DI. That is a very, very new thing. 8 to 10 marks would be the 85 percentile, and just about 4 attempts, friends. 4 attempts would have got you to cross the cutoffs. So this section can become an example to tell that if you could only select the right questions and just crack 4 of them out of 22, you would have crossed the cutoffs. And that sounds very fairy tale like, but true, friends. Sometimes the paper can get so tough that 4 questions can put you across the line. And as usual, to be a good scorer, again, it's a low score. 15 to 16 itself would fetch you at the 95 percentile. About 7-8 attempts, friends, with good accuracy. And to ace the section, and we've heard of even IIT guys who are very, very good, 99 plus percentile guys, attempt barely 10, 12 questions, and without full confidence, again, maybe 1 or 2 mistakes. So that pegs the 99 percentile expected values to be around 26 marks, 25 to 26 marks. Again, these are first cut analysis. We will be refining these analysis within a couple of hours, at most by tomorrow, as all the slots information comes in. So overall, friends, we can see that CAT 2023 slot 1 has been perceivably higher in terms of difficulty level across sections and a consistent manner than compared to last year. So number of attempts have fallen significantly. That means the overall scores would fall significantly also. The cutoffs have fallen, sectional scores have fallen. So students should remember that they should not go in with a predetermined mindset of like at least 6 attempts, at least 10 attempts I have to make. So something which we warn you against, because today at least a quant section would have completely shattered your expectations. So you would have panicked if you had such kind of a predetermined numbers in your mind. But selecting the right questions, that would have made a lot of difference. For example, if last year there were 5, 6 easy, tough questions which had to be avoided, or maybe 7, 8 tough questions which had to be avoided, this year there were barely 4, 5 questions which should have been attempted. So here we see how someone who could have identified those 4, 5 questions, and in the first, let's say half the time, 20 minutes, those 4, 5 questions, cracking them would have given you confidence. And another 20 minutes, another 5, 6 questions, maybe 5 questions, 10 attempts. Trust me, friends, you would have been in the 99 percentile. You would be in the 99 percentile with 10 attempts with good accuracy. So that is the key, we would say, selecting the right questions with a calm mind and open mind. So we are done with the slot 1 analysis, and we are looking at overall scores of low scores. As we said, that overall cutoff, not cutoff, but the 90 percentile mark would have as low as 38 to 40 marks. And that's significantly lower than most years, friends. At least 10 marks plus lower than last year. The 95 percentile overall could be a 48 marks, around 20 attempts. Overall, friends, can fetch you a 95 percentile, which usually converts to at least 1 IM call. And then we have a 99 percentile expected at around 66 to 68 marks. Again, as we say, this is first cut analysis. We could be off by a couple of marks more this side or that side. Again, this means around 24, 25 attempts throughout the 3 sections with good accuracy, and you would have been at a 99, which usually fetches you 2 or 3 IM calls. If not the best IMs, but surely some of the older IMs, you would be looking at getting some calls. So overall, friends, we see that it was a very, very tough experience for the first slotters, and we have to wait and watch if CAT is maintaining this kind of a pattern, difficulty level across the 3 slots. So we will get back to you as soon as we analyze even those slots. Hang on and tune in and stay tuned. Good night for now.